Now, we mentioned this latest poll on the Voice to Parliament showing support has narrowed even further, down from 58 to 53% in a month. It also shows support has dropped among Liberal and Labor voters, down to just 27 among coalition supporters. Liberal Senator Andrew Bragg made the point on this program last month about the level of coalition support for the Voice.
I believe that you probably need about 25% of Liberal national voters to support this for it to be successful.
Andrew Bragg joins me now. That number today, 27%, you're right on the money. Any further fall and this thing will go under. What's your sense right now?
Good afternoon, Kieran. I think the government have an opportunity now to respond to the report of the Parliament into the legislation. There have been a number of options that they could consider, which would address some of the issues that I think are starting to come into the polling. I think many Australians are worried about the risk that the reform could pose to the overall institutional framework, and it could be addressed by adopting some of the options that we put into the report last week.
And you had a separate report yourself. There were a couple of dissenting reports. You wrote one individually. What would you like to see the government take up here to maximise the support from Liberal voters?
There's no doubt that the bulk of the evidence from constitutional lawyers and former judges was quite clear that you could de-risk the proposal without undermining the capability and capacity of the bodies by looking at minor tweaks like the inclusion of 7 additional words and the legal effect of its representations, which has been in the media over the past few months. And I don't see why you wouldn't do that. I mean, no one has come forward with any evidence to suggest that that wouldn't be a good idea. So I just hope that the government take this last chance. I think the committee process itself is now a lost opportunity to history. It could have been a process which could have been a coming together, but unfortunately we've ended up with these different reports. But now it's up to the government to make the next move.
The former Shadow Attorney General and Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, Julian Leeser, was on the program earlier. He's reiterated his call for the government to also support amendments, specifically to remove reference to executive government. That remains his core concern, and that of others like Greg Craven, like Father Frank Brennan, and former justices of the High Court as well. Is that something you'd like to see? Do you think there would be more of your party and party supporters who'd get on board if they did that?
Personally, I have no problem with the executive government being in the amendment itself. A core component of the proposal is that the voice and voice bodies must be able to engage with the executive. That's where most of the decisions are made. So I have no problem with that being in the amendment itself. But I think the way that it's currently presented, there are some residual risks. I mean, all the constitutional lawyers and all the experts have different views on the level of risk. Many think that there's no risk. Many think that there is a moderate risk. Some think that there's a high risk. The question is, though, why would you proceed to a referendum if there is any risk? And I think this proposal should be risk-free. So personally, I have no problem with executive government being in there, but I think a small tweak would seriously de-risk without neutering the concept.
Yeah, well, you could legislate for the voice to be able to make representations to executive government, not enshrine it in the Constitution. Do you think as we get closer to the referendum that we see this trend continue, or do you agree with the likes of Sophie Scomps and Adam Bant, who on this show this afternoon have said they remain optimistic that when people start to focus on the voice and the referendum, that support will turn around and that the referendum will be won?
I think the product could still be improved. So I would rather focus on improving the product rather than focusing on messaging or other things. The fact is there's a small tweak on the table that the government could take, or there are bigger tweaks that were proposed in the Liberal Party report, which include Mr Leese's option. But I would have thought that the government, where it's at the moment, would be most minded to perhaps taking on the 7 words tweak, and I'm hopeful that they will seriously consider that.
Senator Bragg, thanks for your time. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kieran.